We get a big CPAC welcome to Bronwyn Bishop, former Senator, MP, Minister and Speaker of the House.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming out on a Sunday morning after you had a fantastic feast of speakers through yesterday, and so much to learn, so much to glean from the different points of view that are being presented. So it's an honour for me to come and join you and thank Andrew Cooper for his work and putting it all together, and to allow me to perhaps sow some thoughts that might also trigger some further thinking for you. The first thing I'd ask is, why was it we all got so excited about the Matildas? What was it? What was it that turned out hundreds of thousands of people? Excitement leading up to it. It was an absence of hope that had been present before, and suddenly here was a beacon. A team that wasn't besmirched by some of the things that happen with men's sport. They were people who were dedicated to their sport, who were achieving, and even in loss showed grace. And I think that showed that the Australian people responded when someone gave them something to look up to. At the moment, we are in a very sad place in Australia. We're in a sad place because we have a Prime Minister who is dividing the nation on the question of the voice. He is prepared to surrender the sovereignty of the Parliament to the High Court. And he's not even sufficiently engaged in the reality of what he's doing to even read the documentation. We're in a situation where we've had a Reserve Bank that has pushed interest rates, which is now forcing young families and people who've bought houses to face losing that house with a value of less than it was that they purchased. We're seeing petrol, and this morning I listened to the Prime Minister and he was asked the question, how much is a litre of petrol? And he said, oh, I don't really fill up my car, but last time it was about $1.80. Really? Really? He didn't know that it was around $2.20, or if you want 98, you can pay $2.47. He's not at the level of an understanding of what is happening within our community and within the nation as a whole. So we've seen interest rates being pushed up to curb inflation, but at the same time, you've seen fiscal policy, government expending, pushing up wages to the extent that within aged care, with those wage rises, the NDIS now is losing people who are working as carers to the aged care because he's pushed up one wage, whereas the other one had been higher before. Once you get into the business of pushing up wages and chasing inflation, it is disaster. You might actually receive more money, but you'll buy less with it because it's worth less. That's what inflation's about. So into that doom and gloom, we see that we had this ray of hope, where the Matildas and their green and gold gave us a feeling that was hopeful and decent. But what is it that marks the difference between what you as an audience and about one half of Australia think? What is the difference between socialism, which is what the current government is? It's a socialist government led by a hard left-wing socialist leader. In fact, he used to be called Elbow the Trot, short for Trotskyite. And he was hard left, on the floor, through university. And now he pretends that he's all benign and headed for the middle. Well, he's not. In industrial relations, we see all the work that was done through the Howard years, and indeed through the Hawke years, being turned right back to where it was. And that's going to make it harder and harder for people. So what are the two things that are important, and for me that are important, that says what conservatism, radical conservatism, if you like, is all about? For me, the guiding principles have always been free enterprise and the philosophy of individualism. Free enterprise tells me what is the business of government, and that is to do those things which the private sector cannot or will not do, and to provide for those who cannot provide for themselves. That's it. The philosophy of individualism is not a selfish philosophy. It's a philosophy that says that we in government have an obligation to set the policy parameters so that individuals can reach their maximum potential. And that's not just for the brightest in the land. It's not just for the people who are getting along and doing okay. It's also for people who have a disability or people who are disadvantaged. And it includes people like the woman to whom I have referred on television about living on a slab outside Alice Springs with children and her niece who needed dialysis. Her name is Kate Petjara. Her niece's name is Miranda Pepperall. They are two individuals who were in desperate need with the children who were living there. And yet they had lived in that way for 2 years. Where is all the money that is provided through government to assist people in Indigenous communities to have assistance? Where does it go? It's not good enough to say, oh, we'll just consult people and it'll all go away. It won't. I remember well a woman I came to know called Mary Kanji. She's an Aboriginal artist. I bought her painting in Darwin, and when I was doing a visit into remote areas, I actually came to meet her, and I bought another picture. But she was a woman who had no purpose until her daughter said to her, "Mum, you've got talent, get up and use it." And she did, and her paintings are hanging in galleries. It's actively making sure that where help is available, it reaches the people in need. That's the philosophy of free enterprise, of individualism, and the policies of free enterprise. They need to meet. They need to have the foresight to identify the people who are in need, not lump them all together as a collective. And that's the other point, you see. The only other philosophy available is collectivism. And that's what socialism is. It's collectivism. With individualism, you make decisions that enhance the individual. With collectivism, you make decisions where the individual is sacrificed to the collective. The results from individualism means, as von Hayek has written, and if you enjoy his books, From the Road to Serfdom to whatever, you will find that by enhancing the individual, and the spirit of ingenuity and innovation will beat a 5-year plan every time. We haven't got a 5-year plan here, we've got a 7-year plan. We're told that by 2030 we will have 85%, I think is the latest aspiration from Mr. Bowen, strange man, Mr. Bowen. He thinks that it's cheap when it's hugely expensive. If something is cheap, you expect the price to go down, don't you? Anybody had a bill go down? No. Everyone's bill's gone up and will continue to do, because whereas the wind and the sun are free, the means of getting it via a turbine, hideous things that they are, or panels to your home is hugely expensive. And the difficulties of being able to make it travel along the lines of distribution is an enormous difficulty one. So we've invented terms like firming, of which we're all becoming familiar with, ways of being able to push the power along the lines to make it get to your home. This whole exercise is hugely expensive. Now, I know Keith Pitt was talking about nuclear. The big argument against that is usually that I don't want it in my backyard. Well, the answer to that is you could put 3 small, medium-sized reactors on the footprint of Liddell. you would use the same infrastructure and the same grid. So that argument isn't used. And it won't disfigure our pastures and destroy prime agricultural land as is happening now. You've had tales out of Melbourne where it is said that Tasmania, the wedge-tailed eagle is being killed by those blades as they go. You hear hundreds and hundreds of birds being killed. Now they want to put them in the ocean and kill the whales that everybody's been so concerned about previously, but not anymore apparently. You can cut down swathes of forests, not for the timber industry, which can be used and be made renewable, but to erect these hideous, huge windmills. So there's no logic to the policy at all. Whereas if you follow the logic of what is now being stated by the coalition, you start to see some sense being made. So we go to where we are as a nation and what are our outlooks and what do we hope for our children and our grandchildren. I have one grandchild who's 15, and I look at some of the assignments she set at school, in history assignments, and I just cringe, because history is what made me want to be a Member of Parliament. History taught me that individuals can make a difference in the world, some for evil and some for good. Hitler was a strong, powerful leader for evil. Churchill was a strong, powerful leader for good. And so I decided I wanted to have a say in what happened to my country. And I planned my life out, and I thought, well, if I want to make the laws of the land, it'd be a good idea if I understood them, I think. So I did law. And I still have a current practicing certificate today. But I then planned my life out in sort of 7-year chunks, and I thought, well, maybe if I go into Parliament in my early 40s, maybe by then I might have learned something, because you have to bring something to politics, not take from it. If you enter the political arena to take from it, to make you feel good, you'll be lousy at it. If you go there to say, I'm bringing some experience which I hope will assist in making better policy and make Australia function even better, and then you meet with like-minded people, then you do have a chance of making that positive contribution. So when I formed those views, I thought back through the history premise of my dad and my mum. My mother was an opera singer. My dad an engineer. They were going to go to London in 1939. Guess what happened? World War II. My dad signed up, and he was in the Air Force. He fought up in the islands. He was up in Balikpapan and up in New Guinea as well. He never talked to me much about the war, but he did talk to my brother, who subsequently talked to me. And I learned stories of really quite courageous behaviour. My mother, she formed theatre concert parties and entertained the troops when in their camps. There was a commitment to the Australian nation. And one of the things that makes me so disappointed about this whole debate about the voice is that it's trying to denigrate the great nation that we are. They're trying to teach our children that it is not a place to be proud of, but to be angry about, to be ashamed of. And it's up to all of us who know that this is a brilliant and wonderful country to be the voice that is sounding to our young people, and particularly those close to us, that the story of Australia is not without blemish, none is, but it's a story of courage and determination and commitment. When the first colony was founded here, it nearly collapsed for starvation. It was only ingenuity and innovation that allowed it to survive. But there are so many good things that we have done. But most of all, We had a strong, or our forefathers had a strong commitment to building a nation of which we could be roundly proud. And so in World War I, when we're a country of 5 million people, 100,000 were wounded, 60,000 died, and in World War II, another 40,000 died. In subsequent wars, we have been able to save more people, but the commitment is still there. And I want to say, if I was not with you today, I would be gathering with Vietnam vets in what was my old electorate to honour those who served in that war. Those men, those young men, when they came back after fighting a war with as much courage and as much tradition that they were honouring as the original Anzacs, they were spurned. They were not honoured. One of them had red paint thrown all over the house. There were horrible things that happened. And yet, it is only now, 50 years later, that the RSL has apologised to those men for refusing them admission to RSL clubs. But the theme that remains true is that we have been prepared to fight for freedom, which we share with everybody. There should be no division in our country on the basis of race. We should be embracing each other of people of success, people of need, people just getting on with their lives. We have so much to offer, and we have, strangely, we are, all of us, an immigrant nation. Some of us came 60,000 years ago, some came 60 years ago, some came 6 months ago. But we welcome them all. And what we've built is a fantastic multicultural nation where we say we honour every individual for the contribution they're going to make. And for those in need, we will provide that need. But it is government's responsibility to make sure then when money is made available, it is targeted and it reaches those people in need. As I said, my dad fought for this nation. He gave me a wonderful gift. He gave me the gift of freedom. How could I walk away and not be as equally committed to giving my children and my grandchild an equal gift of freedom? That places a burden on me and on every one of you in this room today and many, many more to ensure that we honour the sacrifice that has been given by others. Don't turn your back on courage. Never turn your back on commitment and sacrifice. We are a proud and effective nation who play our part in the world, on the world scene. We have never been found wanting. But we mustn't tear ourselves apart. And if I can simply say this about why I will be voting no in the referendum. If it went through, the Parliament would hand its sovereignty to the High Court. And I'll give you an example. Once it goes into the Constitution, the High Court has jurisdiction to deal with it. There was a case, or rather in 2020, there was an amendment made to the Australian Citizenship Act. It put in place a new section called 36B, which gave the Minister for Home Affairs the power to strip Australian citizenship from an individual who had engaged in terrorist activity and had dual citizenship. And that was done on pursuant to the previous clause and 36B. One person called Alexander decided to challenge it in the High Court. and sued the minister. The High Court found 6-1 that the clause or the section was invalid. It was ultra vires. And it was invalid because, their honours held, the ability to judge whether or not someone was engaged in terrorist activity and then punish them by taking away their Australian citizenship was exclusively a judicial function and therefore in conflict with Chapter 3 of the Constitution, which gives that jurisdiction, which gives to the High Court that jurisdiction exclusively. That was their interpretation. There is nothing to prevent the High Court interpreting whatever the Parliament says pursuant to the voice being carried, declaring it to be invalid or interpreting it to be more onerous, and nobody but nobody can predict how a future High Court will find in any area. So I've given you one example. I could give you dozens. I could give you the example of 3 cases that were fought in the High Court: Pape, Williams 1 and Williams 2. The final upshot of one of which means that the concept of executive government or executive function has now to be absolutely tied to a head of power in the Constitution, and not as been previously thought once money had been appropriated through the Parliament. So that has actually put at risk somewhere between 5 and 10% of all grants that the federal government makes today. So it is such an uncertain world. You could see a decision being made about state aid to government schools, which could end up in the High Court. And who would go there but the dogs, the Defence of Government Schools people? There are so many uncertainties. And when you hear views from people like Justice Callanan, who was such a splendid voice on the High Court, and when you read judgments and you find a decision will come out 4-3, you know that when 2 barristers are presenting themselves before the High Court, each arguing a different point of view, that the predictability of the way it's going to come out is not one that any Prime Minister, Minister, do-gooder can say the High Court can't touch it. What the Parliament says is supreme. Because once it's in the Constitution, the High Court is supreme. So there are so many issues and so important to get those messages out and to see that Australia values the Constitution, values what our forefathers have done in establishing it and drawing it up. And after all, the concept of having a federation began in 1860. It took till 1901 to actually accomplish it. So my final words to you are this. Each and every one of you and the friends that you have a huge obligation to defend our nation in this time of need, to stop it being divided on the basis of race, and to leave the Parliament in charge of the business that the people of Australia wanted to have. Our Constitution requires government to legislate and to govern for the peace, welfare and good government of the people of Australia. And the voice of every parliamentarian has to contribute to that. And each one of you are a leader in your own right. You're here because you think, you care, and you have views that you want to share. So make sure it's a loud voice that you have in this divisive debate. And can I simply say thank you to you for upholding the things that are precious in this nation and ensuring that hope and pride and determination to strive and succeed remain the guiding features of this wonderful country of Australia. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Bronwyn Bishop.